They told him to stand up and move while the plane was still boarding, while everyone was watching, while the aisle camera light blinked red like an accusation. "Sir, you can't sit there," the flight attendant said, her voice sharp, loud enough to carry 3 rows back. "You need to step out of the cabin now." The man in seat 8A did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He looked up slowly, blinking as if waking from a dream that had been cut short. His right hand stayed on the armrest. His left hand rested on a folded boarding pass, creased and soft from being checked too many times already. "My seat is 8A, he said, calm, almost tired. "That's what it says." A few heads turned. Shoes stopped shuffling. The hum of the jet bridge seemed to lower, as if the aircraft itself was listening. The attendant did not look at the paper. She looked at him, at the worn leather jacket, at the scuffed boots, at the grey threaded into his beard. Then she glanced over her shoulder toward the front of the plane, where a man in a tailored navy blazer was already standing, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching the scene like something owed to him had been misplaced. "There's been a change," she said. "We'll explain it off the aircraft." That was the word. Off. The man in 8A breathed out through his nose. Slow, controlled. He knew that word. He had heard it before in places that pretended not to see him. He felt the heat in his chest rise and pressed it down the way he had learned decades ago, when panic could kill people faster than bullets. Around them, the cabin filled with the small sounds of discomfort. A woman clutched her purse tighter. Someone behind him whispered, "Just move." Another voice said, "Why is this taking so long?" The man finally stood. He was tall, taller than he looked seated, his shoulders broad beneath the jacket. When he stepped into the aisle, the space seemed to shrink. The attendant took a half step back without realizing she had done it. "What's your name, sir?" she asked. He looked at her then. Really looked. Her hands were trembling. She hid it by tightening her grip on the tablet. "David Mercer," he said. The name meant nothing to anyone there. And that, at this moment, was the point. The plane was an early evening flight from Pittsburgh to Seattle, a long cross-country run favored by retirees visiting grandchildren, contractors chasing late-season work, and men who traveled light because life had taught them not to need much. The light through the windows was the color of rusted gold. The air smelled like recycled breath and coffee. David had boarded early because his knee didn't like rushing anymore. He had taken 8A because he always took the window. He liked to see where he was going, even if it was just clouds and fading light. He had fallen asleep thinking about the voicemail he had left that morning, his voice low, so his daughter would not hear the strain. A woman across the aisle leaned forward. "He was here first," she said softly. The attendant ignored her. David could feel the old weight settling in, the sense that this moment was being decided by everything except the truth. He thought of his daughter at the kitchen table, doing homework under a flickering light. Thought of the envelope he had not yet opened, waiting at home. Thought of how tired he was of being reasonable. "I'm not refusing," he said evenly. "I'm asking why." The attendant hesitated. Her eyes darted to the front again. The man in the blazer exhaled loudly. "Because," he said, "this airline takes care of its premium customers." David nodded once, slow. "So do I," he said. The words slipped out before he meant them to. A mistake. Or maybe not. The man in the blazer frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" David did not answer. He reached into his jacket instead, fingers brushing something solid beneath the lining. The attendant stiffened. "Sir, if you have a problem, we can call security." David looked up at the overhead bin, then back at her. "You already did." She froze. From the back of the cabin, a uniformed figure stepped forward. Not airport police. Not yet. A man in a dark suit, no badge visible, eyes alert, Posture wrong for a civilian. He did not speak. He did not need to. The attendant swallowed. The man in the blazer stepped back half an inch, instinctively. David met the suited man's gaze. A silent exchange passed between them. Recognition, permission, restraint. "Stand down," David said quietly. The suited man stopped. The cabin had gone fully silent now. No whispers, no movement. Even the engines seemed to wait. David turned back to the attendant. "I'll move," he said, "for now." Relief flashed across her face too quickly to hide. "But," he added, "I want your name." She gave it. "And I want his," David said, nodding toward the blazer. The man bristled. "You don't get to demand anything." David looked at him with something like pity. "I do," he said. "Just not yet." He stepped out of the aisle, letting the man slide into 8A. The seat creaked under unfamiliar weight. The window remained closed. David took the empty seat across the aisle instead. Middle, tight. His knee protested. He ignored it. As the doors closed and the plane pushed back, the woman who had spoken earlier leaned toward him. "You didn't deserve that," she whispered. David stared straight ahead. "No," he said. "But it's not over." Somewhere deep in the aircraft, a call connected. A system logged a time. A name was entered. The man in 8A leaned back, smug, unaware that the ground beneath him had already begun to shift. And David Mercer closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to prepare. The plane reached cruising altitude under a sky the color of dull steel, the city lights fading into a thin, trembling web beneath the wings. Seatbelt signs clicked off. A few people exhaled like they had been holding their breath since boarding. David Mercer did not move. He sat upright in the middle seat, shoulders squared, hands resting loosely on his thighs, eyes open but unfocused. The hum of the engines pressed into his chest, familiar, steady, almost comforting. Across the aisle, the man in 8A reclined fully, blocking the window, tapping on his phone with the casual entitlement of someone certain the world would continue bending for him. His name, David already knew. Richard Halverson. The kind of name that lived on plaques and donor walls. The kind that came with assistance and quiet favors. The kind that rarely heard the word no. The suited man from the back of the cabin had returned to his seat, but David could feel him the way you feel weather changing. Present, watching, waiting. A flight attendant stopped beside David's row. Different one this time. Older, calm eyes. She leaned in, lowering her voice.
"Sir, are you comfortable where you are?"
David met her gaze. "No," he said, "but I'm fine." She studied his face, searching for something. Anger, threat, instability. She found none of it. Only restraint. "If you need anything," she said, meaning more than the words. "I know," David replied. She nodded and moved on. The woman who had defended him earlier sat beside the window 2 rows back. She pretended to read, but her eyes flicked up every few seconds. When David glanced her way, she looked down quickly, cheeks coloring. He offered a faint nod. Gratitude did not need language. Minutes passed, then more. The cabin settled into its rhythm. Plastic cups clinked. Overhead bins creaked. Somewhere behind them, a baby cried once, then quieted. David's thoughts moved not to the insult, but to the timing. To the way the attendant had glanced forward before acting. To the suited man appearing too quickly, too smoothly. This had not been random. It had been convenient. He reached into his jacket again, slower this time, careful not to draw attention. His fingers brushed the thin rectangle hidden inside the lining. He did not take it out. He did not need to. Knowing it was there was enough. Across the aisle, Richard laughed softly at something on his screen. He lifted his arm, stretching, flashing a watch that caught the cabin light like a signal flare. He leaned toward the aisle, catching the eye of a passing attendant. "Excuse me," he said. "Could I get another bourbon? And maybe see about a meal upgrade? I was moved around during boarding." The attendant smiled politely. "I'll see what I can do." Richard glanced sideways at David. The smile sharpened. Some people just don't know how the system works. David did not respond. Inside the cockpit, a warning light flickered. Once, then again. The first officer frowned, leaning closer to the panel. "Did you see that?" The captain, grey-haired, steady, glanced over. "Probably a sensor glitch." The light blinked a third time, holding longer now. The captain's jaw tightened. He reached for the checklist. Back in the cabin, turbulence rippled without warning, a sharp jolt that rattled teeth and nerves. A few gasps rose, then settled as the plane smoothed out. David's head snapped up. His eyes sharpened, focus snapping into place like a switch thrown. He knew that movement. Not dangerous yet, but wrong. The intercom chimed. The captain's voice followed, measured, controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're encountering some unexpected air currents. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The words were right. The tone was not. David felt his pulse slow. The world narrowed. Sound sharpened. Smell. Pressure. He closed his eyes briefly, not to retreat, but to count, to listen. The suited man shifted in his seat, one hand brushing his jacket. He caught David watching him. Their eyes met. The man looked away first. Another jolt, stronger, a woman gasped. Someone swore under their breath. Richard sat up straighter now, bourbon forgotten. What the hell was that? The engine's pitch changed. Slight, almost imperceptible. To most, nothing. To David, everything. He leaned forward, bracing his forearms against his thighs. His knee throbbed. He ignored it. The overhead lights flickered. The cabin fell quiet in that particular way people go quiet when fear stops being abstract. The intercom crackled again, but this time no voice followed. Just static. Then silence. David stood. The suited man was already on his feet. "What's going on?" someone demanded. A flight attendant rushed down the aisle, her face pale now, professionalism stretched thin. "Sir, please sit down." David did not sit. "Something's wrong up front," he said. "How would you know?" Richard snapped. David turned to him slowly. "Because when something's wrong, it doesn't announce itself. It hesitates." The attendant opened her mouth to protest. Before she could, the captain's voice cut through the cabin, stripped of polish, tight with urgency. "If there is anyone on board with military aviation experience, combat or test flight background, please identify yourself to the crew immediately." The words hit the cabin like a dropped plate. Gasps, whispers, a sharp intake of breath from the woman behind David. Richard's face drained of color. David did not hesitate. He raised his hand. "I need to speak to the cockpit," he said, calm, clear, unmistakable. The suited man stepped beside him, voice low. "This is it." David nodded once. The attendant stared at him, recognition dawning too late. "Sir, what is your background?" David met her eyes. "Long enough," he said, "and exactly what they just asked for." Richard laughed, brittle. "This is a joke. You?" David did not look at him. "Sit down," he said quietly. The command was not loud. It did not need to be. Richard sat. The plane shuddered again, harder this time. A scream tore loose from somewhere near the back. The attendant's training kicked in. overridden by instinct. "This way," she said, already moving. As David followed her toward the cockpit, the woman who had defended him reached out, gripping his sleeve. Her hand shook. "Please," she whispered. "Be careful." David covered her hand briefly with his own. "I will," he said. "That's the point." Behind them, the cabin watched him go. Some with fear, some with hope, some with dawning realization. And in seat 8A, Richard Halverson stared at the empty space David had left behind, the taste of bourbon sour in his mouth, a question forming too late. Who had he just pushed aside? The cockpit door loomed ahead, reinforced, sealed, humming with tension. David squared his shoulders. This was no longer about a seat. The cockpit door opened only part way, held by the arm of the first officer, who looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Sweat darkened the collar of his white shirt. One hand stayed on the door. The other hovered near the controls, as if afraid to let go. "Who are you?" he asked, voice tight. David did not rush his answer. He let the aircraft speak first. The faint vibration through the floor, the uneven pressure in the air, the slight yaw that should not have been there. "My name is David Mercer," he said. "I flew fighters for the Air Force. I taught recovery when systems stopped talking to each other." Behind the first officer, the captain sat rigid in the left seat. Early 60s, hair silver, jaw clenched so hard the muscle jumped. His eyes flicked to David, then back to the instruments. "We didn't ask for a resume," the captain said. "We asked if anyone could help." David nodded once. "That's why I'm here." Another shudder rolled through the aircraft, longer this time, not violent. Worse, uncertain, the kind that crept under your skin. The first officer swallowed. "Sir," he said to the captain, "we're losing consistency on the flight control response. It's lagging." David leaned forward slightly, careful not to crowd them. "Which axis?" The first officer blinked. "Roll, mostly." David closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them. "Redundant system conflict," he said. "They're arguing." The captain turned sharply. "You don't know that." David met his gaze, steady. "I do." Silence stretched. The cockpit lights flickered, then steadied. "What do you think is happening?" the captain asked. David stepped fully inside now. The door closed behind him with a sound that felt heavier than it should have. He took in the panel in one sweep. Not reading, feeling. "You've got at least one degraded flight control computer," he said, "maybe two. They're not failed enough to trip the full alarms, but they're not agreeing either. The system is trying to average bad data." The first officer's voice cracked. "That's what it feels like." David nodded. "Because that's what it is." The captain's eyes narrowed. "We're on autopilot. We're stable." "For now," David said. "But you're not flying the airplane. The airplane is flying you. And it's getting confused." Another tremor, this one sharper. A warning tone chirped, then stopped. The first officer flinched. That wasn't there before. "No," David said quietly. "It wasn't." The captain exhaled through his teeth. "What are you suggesting?" David did not answer immediately. He reached up, pointed to a specific display. "That sensor. It's lying. Not because it's broken, because it's being overridden." The captain followed his finger. His expression changed. Not panic, recognition. "You're saying we're about to lose authority," he said. David nodded. "Not all at once, piece by piece. And when it goes, it won't be dramatic. It'll be subtle. The kind that kills you because you think you still have time." The first officer looked between them. "Captain?" The captain stared at the panel, jaw working. Years of training. Decades of command. Pride. responsibility, fear. How do I know I can trust you? He asked. David held his gaze. You don't, he said. You trust physics. Another alarm sounded. This one did not stop. The captain swore under his breath. All right, he said. What do we do? David felt something shift inside him. Not triumph. Wait. First, he said, you take it off autopilot. The first officer's hand hovered. Sir, that's against— Do it, the captain snapped. The autopilot disengaged with a muted click. The yoke twitched in the first officer's hands, heavier than it should have been. Jesus, he breathed. It's stiff. David leaned closer. That's your warning. She's fighting herself. The captain's hand shook as he reached for the checklist. We have procedures for this. David did not look away from the controls. You have procedures for failures that announce themselves. This one is hiding. Another jolt. The aircraft dipped, then corrected late. In the cabin, a woman screamed. The captain looked back at David. Say what you're really thinking. David finally turned. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. You're going to have to choose between regulation and survival. The first officer swallowed hard. Sir. The captain stared at the windshield, at nothing but sky. If I let you take over, he said slowly, I break every rule I've ever followed. David nodded. If you don't, you may never follow another. The cockpit went quiet, except for the alarms and the deep, uneven breath of the engines. The captain's shoulders slumped a fraction, years of authority pressing down all at once. All right, he said. You're advising, not flying. For now, David agreed. He placed his hands just above the yoke, not touching, close enough to feel, close enough to be ready. Tell me everything you've seen, he said. From the first second, something felt off. The first officer spoke, words tumbling out now, fear loosened by being heard.
David listened. Truly listened. Not interrupting, not judging, building the picture in his mind.
Outside, the sky darkened. Clouds thickened ahead like a wall. Inside the cockpit, David Mercer felt the old focus settle fully into place. The world narrowing, the noise fading. This was no longer a passenger helping out. This was a pilot returning to a machine that was beginning to forget how to obey. And somewhere behind the reinforced door, 200 people sat strapped into their seats, unaware that the line between routine and disaster had already been crossed. The first real failure announced itself not with noise, but with silence. One of the screens went dark, not fully black, just dim, like a dying ember refusing to go out. The first officer reached for it instinctively, then stopped, hands hovering, afraid to make it worse. That's not supposed to do that, he said. David watched the way the remaining displays compensated, reshuffling data, smoothing edges, pretending nothing had changed. He felt a chill move through him that had nothing to do with altitude. That's the lie, he said. The system's trying to protect you from the truth. The captain's voice was tight now. Which truth? That you're running out of margin? Another tremor ran through the airframe, deeper than before. Not sharp, heavy. The kind that came from mass shifting where it shouldn't. David leaned closer to the windshield. The clouds ahead were no longer scattered. They were stacked, layered like concrete slabs, their edges bruised and swollen. Weather that didn't care about schedules or procedures. We're heading straight into that, the first officer said. The captain nodded. We can't turn back without coordination. You don't have the luxury of coordination, David replied. You have the luxury of choice. For now. The word hung there. For now. In the cabin, the seatbelt sign flashed on again, this time without explanation. Cups rattled. A man cursed loudly. Somewhere, a woman began to pray under her breath, each word clipped and urgent. In seat 8A, Richard Halverson wiped his palms on his slacks. He leaned into the aisle, craning his neck toward the cockpit, as if he might see answers through steel and policy. His confidence had drained away, leaving irritation behind, sharp and directionless. "What's going on up there?" he demanded of no one in particular. The older flight attendant paused beside him. Her face was pale, but her posture was iron. "Sir," she said, "please remain seated." "That man," Richard pressed, lowering his voice. "The one they took up front. Who is he?" She held his gaze for a long beat. "Someone who knows what he's doing," she said, "which is more than I can say for most people in this cabin right now." Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. He sat back, jaw tight. In the cockpit, the first officer's breathing had gone shallow. He was gripping the yoke too hard now, knuckles whitening. "Ease up," David said. "You're fighting ghosts." "I can feel it pulling," the first officer replied. "It's like it doesn't want to listen." David nodded. "Because half of it isn't." The captain flipped through pages on the tablet, then stopped. His hand trembled. "The checklist doesn't cover this," he said. "No," David agreed. "It can't. This isn't a failure. It's a disagreement." Another alarm chimed. Different tone, shorter, angrier. The first officer looked at David, eyes wide. "That's new." David didn't answer right away. He was counting. Time between vibrations, response lag, the way the aircraft corrected itself a fraction too late each time, like an old man missing steps on a staircase. "How long?" the captain asked. David exhaled slowly. "Before it gets dangerous," he said. "Minutes. Before it gets deadly, less." The captain closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. The weight of command settled back onto his shoulders, heavier now, sharper. "Options," he said. David did not sugarcoat it. "You ride this and hope the system stabilizes," he said. "Or you take control away from it before it tears itself apart." The first officer swallowed. "Manual." "Yes, that's not something we just do," the captain said. David met his gaze. "You already crossed that line when you let me in here." Silence. Another shudder, stronger, sent a ripple through the cockpit. The nose dipped, then rose, correction lagging just enough to be felt. In the cabin, someone screamed again. A man shouted for a flight attendant. The sound of panic began to spread, contagious and fast. The captain looked at the first officer. "Can you handle it?" The first officer's mouth opened, closed. His eyes flicked to David. David spoke softly. "Not alone." The captain made his decision. "All right," he said. "We're declaring an abnormal situation. We prepare for manual control." The first officer's hands trembled as he acknowledged. "Yes, sir." David felt the moment settle, the way it always did when theory ended and consequence began. "Listen to me," he said, voice low, steady. "When you take control, it's going to feel wrong, heavy, sluggish. Don't overcorrect. Fly the trend, not the moment." The first officer nodded, swallowing hard. "And if it fights you," David continued, "don't fight back. Lead it." Another alarm blared, longer this time, insistent. The captain swore under his breath. "We're out of time." David placed his hand on the console, close enough to feel the vibration through the metal. "Then let's stop letting the airplane argue with itself." The captain nodded once. "Do it." The first officer disengaged another layer. The aircraft lurched just slightly, like a startled animal. There was a collective gasp from the cabin, felt even through the sealed door. The yoke went heavy. Jesus, the first officer whispered. It's like wrestling a truck. David leaned in, eyes never leaving the horizon. That's because you are. The captain's voice was calm now, strangely so. Altitude stable, airspeed holding. For now, David said again. The clouds loomed closer, dark and dense, swallowing the last of the light. In the cabin, the older woman who had spoken up during boarding reached for the hand of the stranger beside her. He took it without hesitation. Fear had stripped away pretense. What remained was human. In seat 8A, Richard Halverson stared at the closed cockpit door, his earlier words echoing back at him with a bitterness he could not swallow. He had thought power was about position. Up front, a man with no title and no visible authority was quietly proving him wrong. David Mercer felt the aircraft respond, slow and stubborn, but responding. He did not smile. He did not relax. He knew this part. This was the part where the machine tested whether the person holding it deserved to keep holding on. And David was very, very good at being tested. The aircraft did not fail all at once. It eroded. A warning tone cut off mid-chime, as if someone had pulled the plug on it halfway through the thought. One of the remaining displays froze, numbers locked in place, while the aircraft beneath them continued to move, alive and heavy. Data's stale, the first officer said, voice strained. It's not updating. David nodded. Then stop believing it. The captain looked over. Say that again. You fly what you can feel, David replied. Not what the screen insists is true. Another jolt rolled through the fuselage. This one dragged, stretching time, pulling a low groan from the frame. The aircraft corrected late again, a fraction of a second behind where it should have been. Small, invisible, lethal. The first officer's breathing hitched. I don't like this. David didn't soften his tone. Good. Fear means you're still paying attention. The captain glanced at the weather radar, then back at the windshield. We're not making it through that cell in this configuration. David studied the cloud wall ahead. He imagined it not as vapor, but as mass, weight, resistance. You won't, he said. You don't need to. The captain turned. Explain. Lateral deviation, David said. 5 degrees right. Just enough to skim the edge. That'll put us off the airway. David met his eyes. The airway doesn't matter if you don't stay airborne. Silence. Then the captain nodded. Do it. The first officer eased the yoke. The response lagged, then came all at once, heavier than expected. The aircraft rolled, slow and reluctant. Too much, David said calmly. The first officer corrected, hands shaking. It's like steering through mud. Exactly, David said. So don't jerk it. Think pressure, not movement. The roll stabilized, barely. In the cabin, the lights dimmed again. A child began to cry. Someone shouted for help. A flight attendant moved quickly, voice firm but cracking at the edges. Please stay seated, please. In seat 8A, Richard Halverson pressed his forehead to the back of the seat in front of him. His jaw clenched so tight it hurt. He did not look around anymore. He did not want witnesses to what he was feeling. Regret arrived quietly. In the cockpit, the first officer let out a shaky breath. Okay, that worked. David didn't respond. His eyes tracked the horizon, what little of it was visible. The aircraft trembled, then steadied, skirting the outer edge of the storm, where the air was rough but not violent. The captain glanced at the clock. How long can we keep this up? David did the math without looking down. Not long, he said, and it's not the weather that's going to end it. Another display flickered, then dimmed. The first officer's voice dropped. Captain, I see it, the captain said. David felt the shift in the aircraft before the numbers changed. The controls grew heavier, more resistant, like something pushing back. "We're losing authority," the first officer said. David nodded once. "Incrementally, which means we still have choices." The captain leaned back in his seat, staring at the ceiling for a brief second, like a man searching for something just out of reach. When he looked back down, the decision had already been made. "Where can we put this thing down?" he asked, "if it gets worse?" David had already been there. "There's a joint use field 300 miles ahead," he said. "Old military runway, long, forgiving." The captain frowned. "That's not on our alternate list." "It should be," David said, "because it's still there, and it doesn't care about paperwork." Another tremor rippled through the aircraft, stronger now, deeper. The first officer fought the yoke, teeth clenched. "Easy," David said. "Don't wrestle it." "I'm losing it," the first officer whispered. David's voice sharpened, not loud, but absolute. "No, you're not. You're letting it drag you. Lead it." The first officer adjusted, slower this time. The aircraft responded, grudging but real. The captain watched them, something shifting behind his eyes. Trust, built not on credentials, but on outcome. "David," he said. Not Mercer, just David. "If this keeps degrading..." David did not let him finish. "Then I'll take it," he said. "If you let me." The captain held his gaze. Years of command, rules etched into muscle memory, consequences waiting on the ground. Another alarm sounded. This one stayed on. The first officer looked between them. "Captain, I can't." The captain raised a hand. "I know." He looked at David. "If we cross that line, there's no coming back." David nodded. "I crossed it the moment I stood up in the cabin." The captain's mouth tightened. He exhaled once, hard. "Stand by," he said. In the cabin, the flight attendants had begun moving people into brace positions without saying the word. Voices low, touches firm, eyes steady, but afraid. The older woman reached for her purse, fingers closing around something small and metallic. She whispered a name. In seat 8A, Richard Halverson closed his eyes. The watch on his wrist felt absurdly heavy. Up front, the aircraft shuddered again, this time not correcting fully. The nose dipped, just enough to steal breath. The first officer cried out. "Captain, that's enough," the captain said. He turned to David. "You have the controls." The words landed like a gavel. David did not rush. He did not celebrate. He simply slid into position, hands settling onto the yoke as if they had always belonged there. The aircraft resisted him immediately. He pushed back, steady, deliberate. "I have control," he said. The captain nodded, voice quiet. "You have control." David felt the full weight of the machine then, the lives behind him, the thin margin ahead. He did not think about the man in 8A. He did not think about the insult, or the seat, or the moment he had been told to move. He thought about angles, about pressure, about bringing something heavy and unwilling back to the ground. The aircraft groaned, then steadied under his hands. Not safe, but flying. And for now, that was enough. The moment David took the controls, the cockpit changed. The noise did not. The alarms kept calling out in flat, indifferent tones. The engines kept their uneven rhythm. But the tension shifted, like a current redirecting itself through a stronger conductor. The yoke fought him, not violently, persistently, as if the aircraft were testing whether the hands holding it knew the difference between force and authority. David adjusted his grip, looser, then firmer. He felt the resistance through bone and tendon, through the old injury in his shoulder that flared when weather turned. He welcomed the pain. Pain meant feedback, Feedback meant connection. "Talk to me," he said, eyes forward. "What do we still trust?" The first officer swallowed, voice thin but present. "Engines are stable. Fuel flow is steady. Hydraulics are dropping but not gone." "How fast?" David asked. The captain glanced at the gauge. "Slow bleed, but it's accelerating." David nodded. "Then we don't waste motion." Outside, the clouds peeled away into open sky. Darker now, the sun gone completely. Night was settling in, thick and heavy, the kind that erased depth and lied about distance. David trimmed carefully, every movement deliberate, no corrections wasted. He flew by feel more than numbers, by the way the aircraft leaned into his hands, by the subtle lag between intention and response. "Altitude," he said. "Holding," the first officer replied. "Barely." "That's enough," David said. "Barely keeps people alive." Another vibration rolled through the fuselage, deeper than before, followed by a low, metallic clunk that echoed somewhere behind them. The first officer's head snapped up. "What was that?" David's jaw tightened. "Something we didn't want to hear." The captain leaned forward. Hydraulics just dropped another notch. David exhaled slowly. "Then we commit." "To the diversion," the captain said. "To the mindset," David corrected. "We stop thinking about saving the schedule. We start thinking about saving the airplane." The captain nodded once. He keyed the radio, voice calm, but stripped of pretense. "We are declaring an emergency. Request immediate vectors to the nearest suitable runway with extended length and emergency services." The response crackled back faster than expected, tighter, more serious. In the cabin, the change was felt instantly. The overhead lights dimmed to emergency brightness. The flight attendants stopped smiling altogether. Their voices dropped, steadied, the way voices did when pretending was no longer useful. "Please remain seated," one said, hand firm on a trembling shoulder. "Fasten your seatbelt tight. Tight like this." A man began to argue. He was cut off by turbulence sharp enough to steal words out of mouths. The argument died unfinished. The older woman closed her eyes and pressed her forehead to the seat back. Her lips moved without sound. In seat 8A, Richard Halverson's breathing came shallow and fast. He stared at the back of the seat in front of him, then down at his hands. They were shaking. He clenched them together, hard. This is not how power is supposed to feel, he thought. Up front, the aircraft dipped again. Not much. Enough. David corrected with pressure, not pull. The response came late, sluggish, but it came. Good, he murmured. That's good. The first officer watched him, something like disbelief mixing with relief. How are you so calm? David didn't look away. Because panic wastes time, and time is what we're short on. The captain checked the navigation. Runway is long, weather's clear. We can make it if nothing else degrades. David did not answer immediately. He felt the controls stiffen again, just slightly. A warning whispered through his hands. Something else is degrading, he said. As if summoned by the words, a new alert chimed. Lower tone, more serious. The first officer's voice broke. Hydraulics just crossed minimum. The cockpit went quiet, in that way people go quiet when the math stops favoring them. David nodded slowly. All right. The captain looked at him. All right what? All right, David repeated. Now we fly it all the way. The captain hesitated. What does that mean? It means no go-around, David said. It means one approach, one landing. We don't have the authority to abort. The first officer stared at him. That's reality, David cut in. Not harsh. Final. The captain closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, the decision had been made. "Tell me what you need," he said. David's voice stayed level. Time, quiet, and no second guessing. The captain nodded. "You have it." The engines changed pitch as David adjusted power. Subtle, precise. The aircraft responded like an exhausted animal, slow but willing. In the cabin, the flight attendants had begun demonstrating brace positions without using the phrase. People followed instinctively, arms crossed, heads down, bodies curled inward. A child began to cry again, louder this time. A man pulled the child close, whispering words that shook anyway. Richard Halverson bowed his head. His lips moved. He did not remember the last time he had prayed. Up front, David checked the angle of descent. Too steep, and the controls would not answer. Too shallow, and they would run out of runway. He split the difference. The first officer called out numbers. David filtered them, keeping only what mattered. The runway lights appeared in the distance, a thin line cut into the darkness. "There," the captain said, voice tight. David saw it. He felt it more than saw it. A path, narrow, unforgiving. "Gear," David said. The first officer hesitated. "If we deploy now, we deploy now," David said. The lever moved. The aircraft shuddered, groaning in protest. "Gear down," the first officer confirmed, voice shaking. "Indications are inconsistent." David nodded. "We'll take inconsistent." The runway grew larger, faster than it should have. The aircraft felt heavy, tired, like it had given everything it could and was now being asked for more. David leaned into the yoke, muscles burning. Sweat ran down his spine. "Easy," he whispered, to himself or the machine, he wasn't sure. The captain watched him, something like awe and fear tangled together. This was not in the manuals. This was not in the simulators. This was a man and a machine, negotiating survival. The first officer's voice trembled. "We're coming in hot." "I know," David said. Another vibration shook the cockpit. The controls went heavier still. David adjusted power, holding speed, holding angle, holding the fragile balance between too much and not enough. "Brace," the captain said quietly. In the cabin, the words rippled through bodies like a wave. David focused. The runway filled the windshield now, lights blinding after darkness. "Now," he said. He pulled, not sharply, not gently, with everything he had left. The aircraft resisted, then gave, the nose rising just enough. The ground rushed up, the moment stretched, and then the world came up to meet them. The impact was not a crash, it was a declaration. The main gear struck the runway hard, a violent jolt that snapped teeth together and drove breath from lungs. The aircraft bounced once, a sickening lift that made the world tilt, then slammed back down with a scream of tortured rubber and metal. Overhead bins rattled. Somewhere in the cabin, glass shattered. A woman cried out and then went silent. David did not blink. He drove the nose forward just enough to keep it planted, hands locked on the yoke, forearms screaming as the aircraft fought him for the last word. The engines roared as reverse thrust engaged, a deep animal sound that vibrated through bone and seat and soul. The deceleration was brutal. People were thrown against their belts, heads snapped forward. Loose objects became missiles. "Hold it," David muttered, teeth clenched. "Hold it." The aircraft veered left. He corrected. Right, he corrected again, slower this time, forcing himself not to overreact. The controls were almost dead now, heavy to the point of refusal. Every input felt like shouting into a storm. The end of the runway rushed toward them, lights blurring into a white tunnel. The captain's voice cut through the chaos, hoarse and sharp. Speed. The first officer swallowed. Dropping. Fast. David stood on the brakes with everything he had. The pedals fought back, mushy, uneven. Hydraulic pressure screamed its final protest somewhere deep in the belly of the plane. "Come on," David growled. "Come on." The numbers bled down. 100. 80. 60.
The aircraft shuddered one last time, then slowed to a crawl. And stopped. Silence hit harder than the landing. For a single heartbeat, no one moved. No one breathed. The world hung suspended between what had almost happened and what somehow had not. Then sound rushed back in. Crying, shouting, prayers spoken out loud without shame, laughter that bordered on hysteria, hands gripping strangers, bodies shaking as fear released its grip all at once. In the cockpit, David stayed exactly where he was, hands still on the yoke, shoulders locked, chest heaving. His vision tunneled, dark at the edges. The captain stared straight ahead, eyes glassy. We're down," he said, as if saying it might make it real. The first officer laughed once, sharp and broken. "We're alive." David closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw his daughter's face. Not as she was this morning. Younger, laughing, missing teeth. Sitting on the edge of the bed while he tied her shoes, asking questions that mattered more than any he had ever answered in a cockpit. He exhaled. "I'm going home," he whispered. Not to them, to himself. The captain turned to him slowly. His voice shook, despite every effort to steady it. "You saved this aircraft." David opened his eyes. "No," he said. "We did." Outside, emergency vehicles screamed toward them, red and blue lights slicing through the darkness. Fire trucks, ambulances, men and women running with purpose, with training, with the knowledge that sometimes they arrived too late. This time, they had not. In the cabin, the flight attendants were already moving, voices strong now, authoritative, grounding people back into their bodies. "Remain seated. Help is on the way. You're safe. You're safe." In seat 8A, Richard Halverson sat frozen, hands gripping the armrests so hard his knuckles were white. His chest rose and fell in shallow gasps. He stared at the aisle where David had once stood, the memory replaying with cruel clarity. Stand down. He swallowed hard. Around him, people were crying openly now. Some laughed, some stared into nothing. The older woman clutched the metallic object in her palm and kissed it, tears streaming down her face. The man beside her pressed his forehead to hers without a word. The cockpit door opened. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the smell of burned rubber and wet concrete. A firefighter leaned in, eyes wide, scanning the scene. "You folks okay?" he asked. The captain nodded, still stunned. Yes. The firefighter's gaze landed on David, took in the posture, the hands, the way he had not yet let go. "You flew that in," the firefighter said quietly. David released the yoke at last. His hands trembled violently now, the adrenaline draining all at once. He flexed his fingers, feeling the ache bloom. "I helped," he said. The firefighter shook his head once, a small gesture filled with respect. "You flew it." As the evacuation began, David stood slowly, joints protesting, knee flaring hot and sharp. He steadied himself on the console, then stepped back to make room for the crew. The captain caught his arm. "They're going to ask questions," he said. "A lot of them." David nodded. "I know." "You don't owe anyone anything," the captain added. David met his eyes. "I owe my daughter." They moved into the aisle together. The cabin parted for him without being asked. People reached out, not grabbing, just touching his sleeve, his arm, his shoulder, as if to confirm he was real. "Thank you," someone whispered. Another voice, louder. "Thank you." In seat 8A, Richard stood as David passed. Their eyes met. For a moment, Richard looked like a man searching for words that had never mattered to him before. His mouth opened, closed. "I was wrong," he said finally, voice rough. "About everything." David stopped. The aisle seemed to narrow around them. He looked at Richard. Really looked. Not with anger, with something heavier. "I know," he said. Then he turned and walked on. Outside, under the harsh white lights of the runway, David stepped onto solid ground. The night air cut through him, sharp and clean. Sirens wailed, voices overlapped. Somewhere, a radio crackled with clipped confirmations. He stood there for a moment, alone in the chaos, and felt the weight of what had happened settle into his bones. The plane behind him steamed and ticked as it cooled, scars visible now in the light. 200 lives, one seat, one choice. David Mercer straightened his jacket, rolled his shoulders, and started toward the waiting responders, already feeling the pull of home. He had not asked for this moment, but when it came, he had been ready. They did not rush him off the aircraft. That surprised David more than anything else. Passengers poured past in uneven waves, some crying, some silent, some shaking so hard they could barely walk. Paramedics guided them down the stairs with practiced voices and steady hands. Firefighters moved with purpose, scanning faces, counting heads, calling out numbers into radios. The air smelled of fuel, wet concrete, and burned rubber. Cold seeped through David's shoes and into his bones. He stayed near the bottom of the stairs, off to the side, as if stepping fully into the scene might break whatever fragile order was holding it together. A woman stopped in front of him, maybe late 70s, hair pinned carefully despite the chaos. She held his hands in both of hers, her grip surprisingly strong. Her eyes were wet but focused. "My husband flew bombers in Korea," she said. "He came home quiet. You have the same eyes." David didn't know what to say. He nodded once. "Thank you for bringing us down," she added, then moved on before he could respond. The words followed him anyway. An airline official approached, coat unbuttoned, breath fogging in the cold. He introduced himself too quickly, name lost in the rush. He thanked David, formally, repeatedly, as if gratitude were a checklist item that had to be completed before moving on. "We'll need a statement," the man said. "Tha and spi. Standard procedure." "I understand," David replied. The official hesitated. "You don't have to speak to the media." "I won't," David said. That answer seemed to settle something. Nearby, Richard Halverson stood apart from the others, phone clenched uselessly in his hand. He watched David from a distance, not with resentment now, but with something closer to confusion. The kind that came when a story you had always believed about the world stopped making sense. David did not approach him again. A paramedic checked David's vitals, frowned at his blood pressure, asked if he wanted to sit. David declined. He flexed his knee, testing it. Pain flared, sharp and insistent, but familiar. "I'm fine," he said. The paramedic did not argue. He had seen enough men like this to know when fine meant not yet. The captain was taken away on a stretcher, conscious now, embarrassed more than anything else. He caught David's eye as they passed. There was relief there, and something like gratitude stripped of rank. The first officer hovered nearby, hands still shaking, voice low as he spoke to an investigator. He looked up when he saw David and gave a small nod. Not dramatic, not public. Enough. Hours passed in fragments. Paperwork, questions, repeated timelines. David answered carefully, precisely, without embellishment. He stuck to facts. He avoided heroics. He described systems and sensations, not courage. At some point, the noise receded. The runway lights dimmed. Dawn crept in slowly, a pale line breaking the dark. David sat on a low concrete barrier near the terminal, jacket pulled tight, a paper cup of coffee warming his hands. Exhaustion settled over him like a heavy blanket, now that the adrenaline had finally drained. A woman approached quietly and sat beside him without asking. Mid-60s, practical coat, calm eyes. "I'm Ellen," she said, retired ER nurse. David nodded. "David, I watched you on the plane," she said. "Not up front, back when they were moving you out of your seat." He did not respond. "You didn't get angry," Ellen continued. "That's what struck me. Most men would have." David stared at the coffee, steam curling into the morning air. "Anger narrows your vision," he said. "I needed mine wide." Ellen smiled faintly. "That makes sense." They sat in silence for a moment. "My son flies cargo," she said finally. "Every night I worry." David looked at her then. "That never goes away." She nodded. "No, it doesn't." A phone buzzed in David's pocket, startling him. He fumbled for it with stiff fingers. The screen lit up with a single missed call and a voicemail notification. His daughter. He stood, suddenly unsteady, and moved a few steps away, pressing the phone to his ear. "Dad?" her voice said, small, trying to be brave. "Grandma said there was something on the news. She said your flight had a problem. Are you okay?" David closed his eyes. "I'm okay," he said when he called back, voice rough. "I'm on the ground." There was a pause, then a shaky breath. "You promised." "I know," he said. "I kept it." Silence. Then softer. "When are you coming home?" "Soon," David said. "I'm not far anymore." She exhaled, relief flooding the line. "Okay, I'll wait." After the call ended, David stayed where he was, phone still in his hand, letting the weight of it settle. Behind him, the aircraft sat quiet and wounded, surrounded by cones and tape and flashing lights. Investigators moved around it like ants around a fallen giant, already pulling meaning from metal and data. David knew what would come next. Reports, reviews, maybe commendations he did not want. Maybe questions about why a man like him had been sitting unnoticed in seat 8A. None of that mattered now. What mattered was the pull in his chest when he thought of home, of a kitchen light left on, of a promise made and kept. As the sun finally cleared the horizon, painting the tarmac in pale gold, David Mercer took one last look at the aircraft. Then he turned away and walked toward the terminal, every step carrying him closer to the life he had almost been pulled away from. He had faced the sky again, and this time, it had let him go. The terminal was quiet in the way only airports could be quiet after something went wrong. Too much space, too much light. Voices lowered out of respect or exhaustion, no one quite sure which. David sat across from two men and one woman in a small conference room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee. A digital recorder rested on the table between them, its red light steady and unblinking. Outside the frosted glass, morning continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "Just to be clear," the woman said, early 40s, precise diction, eyes trained to notice what people avoided. "You were not listed as crew, consultant, or authorized personnel on this flight." "That's correct," David replied. "And you took physical control of the aircraft?" "Yes." The man to her left leaned back slightly. Former military, David could tell by the posture, by the way he listened with his whole body. At whose direction? The captain's, David said. After system degradation made normal operation unsafe. The room went still for a fraction of a second. The recorder hummed. You understand, the woman continued, that this will raise questions. David nodded. It should. She studied him. You're not concerned. I'm tired, David said. Concern comes later. The man with the military posture allowed himself a thin smile. It faded quickly. Walk us through the moment you decided it had to be you. David didn't answer right away. He looked at the wall instead, at a framed photograph of a smiling jetliner taking off into a blue sky that no longer existed for him in the same way. I didn't decide, he said finally. The airplane did. They exchanged glances. The woman tilted her head. Explain? When machines fail gradually, David said, they don't ask permission. They force a response. Everyone else was still negotiating with the idea that procedure could catch up. It couldn't. The recorder kept running. The man cleared his throat. Some people in the cabin felt there was hesitation about trusting you. David met his eyes. That's not unusual. The woman's pen paused. Why? David looked at her. His expression didn't harden. It deepened. Because I didn't look like the person they expected to save them. No one interrupted. That didn't matter to the airplane, David continued. Metal doesn't care who you are. Gravity doesn't care. Fear does. And fear is loud. The woman set her pen down slowly. Were you angry? David considered the question. Not in the way people mean. I wasn't insulted. I was aware. Of what? Of how easily people confuse familiarity with safety, he said, and how quickly they hand authority to confidence instead of competence. The man with the military posture nodded once. He understood. The interview ended without ceremony. No handshake, no dramatic conclusion. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something unusual had happened, and that it would take time to understand it fully. Outside, the terminal had begun to fill again. New flights, new destinations. The machinery of normal life grinding back into motion. David stood near a large window overlooking the runway. The aircraft sat farther down now, cordoned off, stripped of urgency and reduced to an object of study. He felt no attachment to it anymore. What mattered had already been taken from it and returned safely to the ground. A voice behind him, hesitant. Mr. Mercer. He turned. Richard Halverson stood there. No blazer now, no polish, just a man in an open collared shirt, eyes rimmed red, hands empty. I don't expect you to want to talk to me, Richard said. But I need to say something. David waited. I built my whole life believing the world made sense if you knew the right people, Richard continued. If you were in the right seat. He swallowed. Last night I learned how wrong I was. David watched him carefully, not judging, measuring. I don't need forgiveness, Richard added quickly. I just didn't want to leave without saying I saw you. Too late, maybe. But clearly. David nodded once. Then learn from it, he said. That's all anyone can ask. Richard exhaled, relief and shame tangled together. Thank you. David didn't respond. He didn't need to. Later, as he waited at the gate for his connection home, David noticed small things more sharply than before. The way a tired father lifted his granddaughter into his arms without being asked. The way an elderly couple shared a newspaper, heads touching. The way people lined up without complaint, grateful simply to be going somewhere. A television in the corner played muted footage from the night before. Blurred images of emergency lights. A headline scrolling across the bottom. Hero passenger assists emergency landing. David turned away. His phone buzzed again. A text this time. "Did you eat? Love you." From his daughter. He smiled, small and private, and typed back. "Soon. Save me some breakfast." When the plane boarded, no one challenged his seat. No one questioned his presence.
He took the window again, settling in with a stiffness that reminded him he was not young anymore. As the aircraft taxied, he watched the ground roll past, solid and dependable. He thought about the night, about how close things had come, about how fragile order really was when tested. He also thought about something else, about how easily people overlooked the quiet ones, the ones who carried experience without advertising it, the ones who waited until they were needed, instead of insisting they be seen. The engines spooled up. The aircraft lifted. David felt no pull toward the sky this time, no longing, no regret. He had already been where he needed to be. As the clouds closed in around the window, David closed his eyes and let the vibration carry him forward, back to a kitchen light, a waiting voice, and a life that had nearly been interrupted, but never taken. Whatever the reports said, whatever judgments were made, whatever stories were told, he knew the truth, and he was going home. David stepped through the sliding doors of the terminal and into the late afternoon light. The sky washed pale blue, as if nothing violent had ever torn through it. The air smelled like asphalt warming in the sun, and jet fuel drifting on a breeze that carried voices, footsteps, ordinary life. His knee protested with every step now, a dull ache that had waited patiently until the danger passed, before reminding him of its existence. He welcomed it. Pain meant he was still here. He paused just outside the doors, setting his bag down for a moment, letting the world settle back into scale. Hours ago, everything had been noise and pressure and weight. Now it was space. Too much space. His phone vibrated again in his hand, a simple rhythm that cut through the haze. He did not look at the screen right away. He already knew who it was. He pressed call instead, lifting the phone to his ear as a shuttle bus roared past, and wind tugged at his jacket. "Hey," he said. His voice sounded older than it had that morning, roughened by smoke and adrenaline and decisions that could not be undone. "Dad." His daughter's voice carried relief that she was trying to hide behind practiced calm. "Grandma made soup. She said you probably forgot to eat." David smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing a fraction. "She's probably right," he said. "Tell her I'll fix it when I get home." "When?" she asked, not pressing, just anchoring herself to the word. "Tomorrow," he said, "early." There was a breath on the other end, then a quiet sound that might have been a laugh or might have been tears held back at the last second. "Okay," she said. "I'll wait." After the call ended, David stood there longer than necessary, watching people move with the unthinking confidence of those who believed the ground would always be there when they stepped forward. He envied that certainty, and understood it better now. A man in a reflective vest walked past, nodding politely. A couple argued softly over directions. Somewhere behind him, an announcement echoed about a delayed flight, irritation blooming and dying without consequence. The world had resumed its normal arguments. An airline representative approached him near the curb, this one younger, careful, carrying a folder tucked too tightly under one arm. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "your car is ready, and thank you." David inclined his head. "You're welcome." She hesitated, then spoke again, quieter. "People are asking about you. Media, a few retired pilots, some veterans groups." He considered that for a moment, then shook his head. "I'm not interested," he said. "I did what needed doing." She nodded, relief flickering across her face, as if she had hoped for exactly that answer. "If you change your mind, I won't," David said.
gently but firmly. The ride to the hotel was silent. The city slid by in reflections, glass and steel bending sunlight into shapes that felt unreal after the night he had just lived through. He watched his own face in the window, lines deeper now, eyes steady but tired. He thought about the man in seat 8A, the confidence that had once filled that space, the way power had looked so convincing until it was tested. He did not feel triumph, only a quiet sadness at how easily people mistook certainty for competence. In his room, David showered longer than necessary, letting hot water pound his shoulders until the stiffness eased and the echoes faded. Steam filled the air, blurring edges, softening the world into something manageable. He dressed slowly, movements deliberate, as if rushing might summon the chaos back. When he finally lay down, sleep did not come right away. His mind replayed moments without emotion now, just data settling into memory. The dip, the weight, the sound of tires meeting runway, the silence after. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him, deep and untroubled. He woke before dawn to the sound of nothing. No alarms, no engines. Just quiet. The kind that used to feel empty, but now felt earned. He packed without hurry, left the room key on the table, and walked back through the terminal as the first flights of the day began to stir. No one recognized him. That felt right. On the flight home, he took the window again. Not out of habit this time, but choice. As the plane lifted, he watched the ground fall away, felt the familiar pressure, the clean separation. There was no pull in his chest, no itch to reach for controls that were not his. Just awareness, trust. He closed his eyes and let the rhythm carry him. At the small regional airport where he landed, the crowd was thin. He spotted his mother first, standing straight despite the cane, eyes scanning every face. His daughter bounced beside her, trying to look patient and failing. When she saw him, patience vanished. She ran.
David dropped his bag without thinking and caught her, the impact knocking the breath from him, her arms tight around his neck. "You're late," she said into his shoulder, accusing and relieved all at once. "I know," he said. "I took the long way." His mother reached them, one hand on his arm, grounding him. She looked at his face, searching for damage she had not told her about. "You look tired," she said. "I am," David replied. "But I'm home." That night, after soup and quiet conversation and the simple ritual of being together, David sat on the edge of his daughter's bed and listened to her breathe as she drifted to sleep. The house creaked softly, settling around them. He thought about the promise he had made years ago, the one he had tested in ways he never planned. He had not broken it. He had carried it through fire and brought it back intact. Later, alone in the kitchen, he turned off the light and stood in the dark for a moment, hand resting on the counter. The sky outside was clear, stars sharp and distant. He did not feel small beneath them. He felt placed, where he belonged. Stories would be told about that night. Some would get details wrong, some would make it louder than it needed to be. David would let them. His life was not in the telling. It was here, in mornings and meals, and the steady work of showing up. If this story stayed with you, tap like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts below with 3 words.